So we'll start off by very quickly looking at the economic growth. We do highlight this. A lot of people actually in Fiji don't understand what is economic growth and why it is important. You can see we've tracked the economic growth in Fiji from 2008 to 2019. We saw forward projections or forward forecasts. You can see the economy actually has been growing consecutively now for 7 years. One of the things that you do find is generally after cyclone, depending on the severity of it, you can get negative growth rates. So despite the fact that Winston wiped off actually one-third of the value of our GDP, cost us about $1.6 billion US. That's the damage of the loss. We still are projecting a growth rate of 2%. Of course, next year and going to the following year, we expect it to pick up. That's the forecast. Of course, as we've explained to a lot of people, the reason why economic growth is critical is because it does create jobs, it creates economic activity, creates a particular robustness within the economy itself. We of course like to see these lines a lot longer. The higher it is, the better it is. But as a government also, economic growth rate is not the only thing we depend on or look at, because the growth must also be able to give benefit to everybody across the board. We're going to select few. Contribution to growth. What are the things that have actually contributed to growth? Do we have the pointer? You can see agriculture has contributed 0.31%. Fishery is very, very low, 0.02. Forestry is 0.01, even lower. As far as the private industries are concerned, I hope you can see it from that angle. Manufacturing actually has been the largest, 0.56. We do manufacture a lot of things in Fiji now, but that also includes sugar production. Not cane production, but sugar production, which is different. But we do manufacture quite a lot of things. Construction has, of course, been quite significant also, but this is, remember, this is a forecast as at October 2016. So it does not take into account the construction that really has taken off, in particular post-Winston. Mining is 0.04, electricity and water 0.10. Services sector, financial services sector is quite relatively strong and stable. Transport, wholesale, retail, all in the 30s. Accommodation, 0.32. And then, of course, you've got the other smaller contributors: information, communication, public administration, etc. Now, for any government, our aim is, of course, to have as the economic, the growth of the economy as broad-based as possible. We don't want to be dependent on only one or two industries. So we don't, for example, only want to be dependent on tourism, the services sector, because if that gets wiped out, then you're actually in dire straits. So the trick of any government is to ensure that the economic growth rate is very broad-based, and that's one of the things that we are working towards. Now, investment indicators, you can see these are stats that's collated by the Reserve Bank of Fiji. It's not collated by government. The value of building permits went up, but this is, of course, Winston was in between here, 12.7% value of work output, 10.5% growth rate. Domestic cement sales, of course, as you tell the students, you don't buy cement to keep it under your house. You actually buy cement because you're going to build something. And the reason why it's very important to track construction is because it creates a lot of jobs. At the moment, I don't know what the situation is in Vanuatu, but it's very, very hard to get a carpenter in Vanuatu, in Viti. Very hard to get tradespeople, very hard to get tile layers. You find that electricians are getting paid $12, $13 an hour. There's a lot of complaints by construction companies that you have a carpenter who's on the site today, tomorrow he leaves because somebody's offering him $1 more an hour rate. We have actually at the moment tradespeople, highly skilled tradespeople from Bangladesh, Philippines and Indonesia working in Fiji, because we don't actually have the requisite skill sets that's required to do the top-end construction that's required. Of course, as you know, government is spending about $132 million in rebuilding schools. That's sort of soaked up a lot of the construction resources. Imports of investment goods, of course, that means that people are importing machinery, etc. That means there are manufacturing going on, people are expanding the factories. Government capital expenditure went up by 7.8%. These are the areas that decline. Generally, we expect the Winston to have an impact on this too. New investment lending Lending for real estate, 17.8%. Lending for building construction went down by 1%. Consumption indicators. New vehicle registration. I don't know about Savusavu, but there's a lot of vehicles in Fiji now. You have traffic jams. You know, it can take you from Nasinu to Suva in the morning about an hour and a half, or hour 20 minutes just to get to Suva. So new vehicle registration went up by 27.5%. If you are going to get new vehicles, you'd rather have new vehicles as opposed to second-hand vehicles coming into the country, which still went up by 7.8%. New lending to wholesale and retail went up by 13.2%. Imports of consumption goods increased quite significantly. You know, your watches, all these other sort of imported goods, consumption goods, food. PAYE collections went up by 4.9%, which indicates either people's salaries are going up or new jobs are being created because more people are actually contributing to PAYE. New job advertisements went up by 15.1%. There's a limitation to this because RBF traditionally has only looked at job advertisements in the Fiji Times. So we've asked them to look at job advertisements in the Fiji Sun also, because we place all our advertisements for government vacancies in the Fiji Sun, for example. Many companies are doing that. Personal remittances went up by 5%. These are generally Fijians sending money back from overseas to their friends, family and relatives, right from rugby players, nurses, and friends and families who may be sending money. Wearable consumption, again, even though VAT went down from 15 to 9%, we are seeing a growth in that area because, of course, people are buying more. New lending to private individuals went down by 4.7% in that period. This shows vehicle registration. You can see in 2005, we had 6,000 second-hand vehicles registered and 3,300. 2016, look at the comparisons. From 6,000 went up to 10,000. From 3,000 went up to nearly 5,000. This is the number of vehicles that are on the roads. Of course, the removal of the duty on hybrid vehicles, there are three categories of hybrid vehicles, of course, has helped. And the general overall reduction in duty. Retail sales survey. Again, this is tracked by the RBF. The graph speaks for itself. Retail sales, of course, went up. We generally expect it to go down after Winston. Next one, please. Please feel free to ask any question. This is tracking inflation. We have a target, you know, our inflation rates, in particular in 2014, has generally been below 2%. There's a slight peak there. You can see how it's picked up now. Because after Winston, a bundle of beans in Vitilevu was costing $5, $7. A small bunch of bananas was costing about $15, $20 in Suva. Yangona still in parts of Vitilevu sells at $110 a kilo, $120 a kilo. Lucky to get it for about $80, $90 a kilo. So you can see that, stacked up again. But we expect a downward trend down to 5.5 at the moment. But these are sort of basket of goods that actually has contributed to inflation. This is very important. A lot of people in Fiji don't understand foreign reserves or do not realize the importance of having a healthy foreign reserve account. As we've explained to the students that you need foreign reserve, most of the things that we have, your mobile phones, your watches, the ladies wearing a watch, the nail polish, the shoes, whatever it is, the lipstick, everything is imported from offshore. And of course you buy these things in foreign currency. So you yourself need foreign currency to be able to trade with foreign traders. This is the international benchmark. They say it's good to have at least 4 months, this is the months, good to have 4 months worth of reserves as a country. It's a good sign. 2005, there's only $549 million as foreign reserves we've had. Today we have $1.9 billion. So about 5.2 months worth of foreign reserves. So we're doing quite well. Of course, this has an enormous impact when we go to negotiate rates, borrowing rates from offshore. The healthier the foreign reserves, the better it is. There's some countries like, for example, Papua New Guinea that are struggling with their foreign reserves. It means that if your foreign reserves are low, there's less opportunity for people to move money in and out of the country. There's very, very tight controls. As you know, the over the years we kind of remove those controls. So this is very, very good for us. We of course want this to grow as much as possible. Now, fiscal deficit. All governments since independence have been running fiscal deficits in Fiji, and we've always borrowed more than what we spend. So I think there was only about 2 or 3 times in our entire post-independence history that we've actually had a surplus. Surplus basically means you've spent less than what you actually collect. So there's one year here, there's obviously a lot of underspending that took place, but there's a couple other times. I think there was one in 1999 when they sold a telecom and post Fiji then, and there was some surplus that they had. Our aim has essentially been to reduce the deficit. As you can see, there's a downward trend. We of course had a cyclone and some floods there. Winston this year has caused a dent in that sense, from 4.7% deficit. Just to put it into perspective, $132 million in schools, another about $70 to $80 million in rehabilitation works, immediate rehabilitation work. So that caused the dent, but as you can see again, we have a target of pushing it down. We like that we go down. If Winston had not occurred, we would have spent less, about $210 million. So this graph probably would have been somewhere sitting here, over there actually. We sat there. Would have been a shorter line. But your deficit, of course, fiscal deficit is important. But what is more important is also debt to GDP ratio. And I'll come back to that later. Total revenue. This is how much money we're actually making as government, what we are collecting. You can see that the revenue for government has increased quite significantly. We're trying to run government as a business. We're trying to see new ways of collecting revenue without it being oppressive. In nominal terms, in other words, actual dollar value, in 2004, the then government had collected $1.1 billion in revenue. Today, we collect about $3.1 billion. It's almost 3 times the amount that we are collecting as revenue. Which is good, of course, because what it means is that when we have that much of revenue, we actually, when we spend that money, we have enough money to pay for our operational costs. It's very, very important. As I've explained to the students, if you want to go and have a party at McDonald's, you don't go and borrow money from ANZ to have the party. The party is finished, and the next day the debt is still there, but all the food and drinks are gone. You only borrow money to actually build. So revenue is good, and we can, as we'll show you later on, that our total operating revenue is more than the total operating expenditure. It's a good space for that. What are the things that make up our revenue? Value-added tax makes up about 30%. Direct taxes, which is corporate tax, etc. PAYE, that all comes there. Customs, this is duties. We have as we've said quite openly, we believe that we can increase the revenue from customs. There's still a lot of business people who are still trying to scheme the system. There's still a lot of business people who are declaring lesser amounts at the border, so they get away with paying less. A lot of them do it. We've tried to strengthen the laws, and we of course have to strengthen our compliance. We also have a lot of business people who have companies offshore. They're buying for them, and then they sell it to their own Fijian company. That's how they have shifting money out of the country and under declaration of the value of goods. Service turnover tax is about 2%, contributes to revenue. Water resource tax. Departure tax is 5%. Stamp duty. We have some sale of assets program, as you know, that we much talked about is the FEA and a couple of the other ones where we're divesting some of our shares in those entities. What we've done, we've put together the total expenditure that we have on infrastructure development, health, education, access to justice, and social protection. This is, of course, social welfare payments. We, for example, at the moment have a number of schemes. We introduced the pension scheme for those, a lot of Fijians who don't belong to FNP, a lot of villagers, a lot of farmers. They've been doing subsistence living or been in the informal sector. They've never contributed to FNP, they never had to. So a lot of them who are getting old don't necessarily have a source of income. A lot of them have become abandoned. The kids leave them alone and, will go off and do their own thing. So we started off by saying that those people over the age of 70, we'll give them $30 a month. It was a very modest sum. Today, we reduced the age to 66 and we give them $50 a month. But it also includes abandoned children, single mothers, disabled people. We spent about $30 million in this, PS, social welfare, about $30 million a year. Access to justice is again things like legal aid. As you know, in Fiji today, we have nearly about 16 outlets of legal aid throughout Fiji. You even have a legal aid office in Nambuwalu. We have one here in Savusavu. In 2006, 2006 actually, the legal aid used to get only $400,000 a year. Today, legal aid gets about $5.5 million a year. It's a constitutional provision, and it's very, very important to ensure people have access to justice. It should not only be the rich who get access to lawyers. It should be those people. In particular, a lot of women take advantage of this. Women who want to claim maintenance, de facto relationships. As you know, we amended the law now, where de facto relationships are also recognized. They have a right to property settlement, etc. Education, very big. On bus fare subsidies alone, we spend $21 million a year paying bus companies to transport kids to schools. We subsidize the bus fares. That does not only include bus. All the buses are the largest segment in it, but we also pay, for example, areas where there's no buses, but there are those mini buses that run. In some of the maritime areas, we actually pay for the punts to take the kids to the schools, because otherwise they can't go to school. Part of that, of course, is the tertiary education loan scheme. It's also the free education. So now children anywhere in Fiji, right up to year 13, don't have to pay school fees. And we've seen a huge shift in that, because traditionally, a family with 4 or 5 kids at the beginning of the year, they had to decide which child would go to school because they could not pay their school fees all in lump sum. Generally, the women got left out, the boys got sent to school, the girls stayed at home. But of course, now we have tertiary education loan. So any student that actually wants to go to university, gets a place in university, but cannot afford to pay the fees, but doesn't get a scholarship, they can get what they call a tertiary education loan. So we pay for the fees. Actually, as we've said, in fact, yesterday in Parliament we had this discussion, and we said we have received literally thousands of people have said to us, we wish we had it in our time. At least, I would have gone to university. My parents could not afford to send me to university, or I would finish high school if we had free education then. Infrastructure development, of course, it's a large chunk for roads, bridges, and jetties. We're spending quite a lot of money in respect of that. Now, this is very important, the expenditure mix. So, this essentially shows typically, say in 2004, the total amount of money that the government spent, 83% went into operational costs. Only 17% went into capital expenditure. This goes to what I was saying earlier on, that your expenditure mix is very, very important. Essentially, you don't really get to see anything for this the following year. This is all your wages, your running of government, your fuel. We've all come here. We have to pay for airfares through here. All of these things, the hiring of this hall, whatever the case may be, this is all operating expenditure. Capital is when you use money to build things. Roads, bridges, jetties, schools, nursing stations. We've had a huge focus to try and change the mix. And as you can see now, our mix is that 60% as opposed to 83% goes into operating, but 40% goes into capital expenditure. So we want to spend our money to show for something in the future years to come. That's very, very important for us. Funding for roads, bridges, and jetties, as I highlighted earlier on, as you saw, that big chunk of money go into that area. By comparison, when we had PWD, they used to get $55 million a year. Today, FRA gets $527 million a year. One of the things that we can just go back. A lot of things that we're also doing here is building better or building back better. I don't know how many of you have recently been to Nandi. If you go to Nandi, you've got that 4-lane road coming out of Nandi Airport going towards Namaka, Matintar. And the trick question I always ask people, I say, what do you see different apart from the 4-laning of the roads? And the trick question is, and the answer is that you don't see any overhead cables. There's no electrical cables overhead. There's no telecom lines overhead. We've put it all underground. So that's what you call building resilience in the infrastructure. After Cyclone Winston, 6,000 kilometers of electrical cables went down all over Fiji. Put them all back up, but God forbid if we have another cyclone, we've got to put, it might all go down again, build it back up again. You can keep on doing that every year or every second year. So we need to think long term. And many of the roads that we obviously are discovering, that many of the roads, when they used to build the roads or tahsil the roads, they used to put the water pipes underneath the road. So So some places, of course, there's a small hole in the pipe. The ground gets softer, nobody knows about it, so too many potholes. But actually there's a leak in the pipe. Eventually when they do find the leak in the pipe, they dig up the road, they fix up the pipe, but don't fix up the road. So now a lot of the areas that we are rebuilding, we're actually shifting physically the pipes and putting them on the side of the road. Putting the electrical cables on the side of the road. So this is kind of building back better, but it does cost money. Long term, it's good. Water and energy, again, we've given a lot of money to water and energy. As you know that we have a huge program in the grid extension. We also have the free water scheme. In rural areas where people used to, for example, before have to make a 10% contribution. We've got rid of that. People no longer need to make a 10% contribution. We simply just get on the program. We can't do everybody at once, not just necessarily because of the money, but because just of the physical capacity, not having enough people to actually do it, both in the private sector and the public sector. But we give free water to households that earn less than $30,000 a year. We give them 90,250 litres of free water a year, wherever you have Water Authority Fiji reticulated system. And of course, we have major programs in terms of, like I said, a grid electrification, but also we subsidize, again, households that earn less than $30,000 a year. The unit cost of electricity is approximately 34 cents a unit. If you earn less than $30,000 a year, we pay 17 cents as government. But FEA must get its full 34 cents. We're running it like a business. You know, previously the way they dealt with it was just kept the tariff rate flat for everybody. So there is no distinction between those who are low income or high income. Even the high income people are taking the benefit of it. So now, if you have low income, we specifically give you the subsidy to FEA, but FEA gets to collect the right tariff rate. The high income people, of course, have to pay the tariff rate themselves. Highlight again funding for education. I've talked about that. You can see how much money we're giving, nearly $600 million, over $500 million in education at the moment. Funding for health, again, you may have heard debates in Parliament and various other correspondence or news articles. The big problem we have in Fiji is a shortage of doctors. Bigger problem than that, we have a shortage of specialists. There's been no investment in specialists in the healthcare system in Fiji. Doctors are very lowly paid. Last year we gave doctors up to 80% pay rise. So at least they have some reasonable form of income. A lot of the good doctors in Fiji used to leave Fiji because, you know, they would get paid a lot higher salaries offshore. Australia and New Zealand, a lot of them become specialists. As I said to a group of students, you don't create specialists overnight. Somebody just simply cannot do an MBBS and then cut you open and play around with your heart. You need 10, 15 years of exposure and experience. We've never done that. We've hardly sent people offshore, if any. We're actually going, you know, train in some hospital and work under some surgeons. We've had a couple of surgeons who come back. There's a Dr. Kapadia who left Fiji post 87. He's now a world famous cardiac surgeon. But he's come and given his energy and services and professionalism. We've set up a unit in CWM. We have a cath lab now. You know, they do all the pacemaker. They do stenting here in Fiji now. But he's built a cadre of professionals. So we have now, after the pay rise last year, and doctors now categorized into 3 different specific areas depending on the level of risk that they're engaged in. We have now said that any doctor that joins the civil service, we will pay for all their postgraduate studies. So we have now doctors who've just joined last year. They've now decided to do postgrad studies at FNU in whatever area. And we're paying for that full time. So you work during the day, you go to FNU and you study at night and you get your specialist skill sets. Of course, we still need to send people offshore. But whilst we're developing the local cadre of doctors, we still need the specialists. So as you may have heard, the Minister for Health and the PS for Health and the PS for Civil Service are going up to India in 2 weeks' time to interview some doctors and in particular specialists. And also we have advertised globally too. So a lot of people actually, you know, putting in applications from other countries. And we need to get the specialists into Fiji to fill in the gap. You should have, you know, at one stage we had only 1 ENT specialist in the entire country. Ear, nose and throat specialist. I mean, Savusavu should have the full complement of specialists. Or at least between Savusavu and Lambasa, you shouldn't have to travel to Suva to get somebody, who may do urology and neurology, necrophilia, all those are kind of, specializations. So that's what we're doing. But we also, like I said, we're doing an overall, it's probably time to mention this, we're doing an overall civil service review. The example that I gave is that this Dr. Kapadi who set up this unit, he's got some of the nurses, and some of these nurses he's saying he's trained them, they can be working in any hospital in Washington or London or wherever it is, or Singapore, and they're just as good as them. But the pay rate, because you have the old traditional civil service way of paying, there may be a senior nurse, and there's also a senior nurse at the same time working in the outpatients who's putting a band-aid over somebody's cut on the knee. The level of risk that this lady undertakes by putting a tube in your heart and putting a stent in while helping them, if they goof up, then you can die. There's a lady who goofs up by not putting the band-aid in the right place, you can simply just pick it up and put another one in the right place. So there's no distinction. This is why we're doing the civil service review, as we talked about it, and we're currently doing that. We've got a New Zealand company engaged to look at the whole way that we structure the civil service, and hopefully we'll get a lot more traction, get more people to stay back in Fiji. This is what I talked about. This is the operating revenue we make, this is operating expenditure. That's the operating savings that we have. The green part is how much we save. You can see the difference between, say, 2004 and what we have now, which is a good space. So we use this money for capital expenditure. Of course, it's not always enough, so we do need to go out and borrow in the market at times. Now, this is very important. Government debt, which is debt to GDP ratio. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, this is what matters. This line here is what matters. So the example that I've used again to simplify it to some people, because people have asked me, I said, look, if we as a country, say assuming our entire GDP or entire wealth was $100, and if we went and borrowed $20, so we are borrowing 20% of what we have. That to GDP ratio would be 20%. If we then, our economy grows and we become richer and we have $500, but instead of borrowing $20, we can borrow $50. That's nearly double than what we borrowed, but it's only 10% of GDP. So as you become wealthier, your capacity to actually borrow becomes a lot more, it increases. But as a percentage of GDP, we want to decrease it. So you can see we've been actually doing that. It's been our stated objective. And we went slightly up because we had a small natural disaster here, but in Winston it went down 48.6%. If Winston had not occurred, this line would have kept on going down. Essentially, that's what it is. So it's gone up here because of Winston, but if Winston had not occurred, we would have gone down. So debt to GDP ratio at the moment is 48.6, still below 50%. Actually, it's good, not a bad space to be in. I can tell you debt to GDP ratio in some of the countries is 100%, 110%. But our objective as a government is, of course, in the short to medium term, is to get it down to 40%. And that's our goal. So this is the last slide. What have I said to you? Economy is accelerated to growth to grow at 63.6% and record the 8th consecutive years of growth with favorable prospects for medium term. There's a lot of private sector positivity, a lot of private sector investment. In particular on Vitilevu, a lot of factories are expanding, a lot of opportunities. We of course are trying to look at other areas to grow private sector investment. So for example, ICT is one area that we are very keen about, where 69.4% of our entire population is below the age of 40. So of course enormous challenges but enormous opportunities. We today have more SIM cards in operation than the actual number of people in Fiji. There are 450,000 smartphones that are operational in Fiji. This brings about a lot of opportunities, both for businesses and also our ability to, develop the ICT sector. We have got people who are interested. Our High Commissioner from Australia recently bought about 10 or 12 companies from Australia that were purely on the ICT sector. So things like call centers, back-end processing, all those sorts of things. It was really interesting. We were told that a few years ago that they like Fiji because we're in the right time zone, and apparently our accents are neutral. So they don't have to spend millions of dollars to get some American or Australian to understand us when we speak. Our people speak on the phone. That's what they do in places like Philippines and in India, where they have large call centers. They actually spend millions of dollars just to get them to have that American twang or the Australian twang. But they don't have to do it with us. Our debt position is very sustainable. It's actually quite good. Higher capital expenditure and operating savings, of course. We're spending a lot on that. Broad-based growth with potential in various sectors. We are, for example, at the moment working with IFC, as announced in the budget last year. We're setting up a manufacturing area in the Western Division. In Europe, for it to get a lot of traction, it needs to be close to an international airport, near a seaport, so it makes sense to have it somewhere between Nadi and Lautoka. Our foreign reserves are comfortable, of course. We spend about $1 billion a year buying fuel, fossil fuel. We buy fuel to run buses, cars, tractors, ships. But we also buy fuel to run generators. And this is why, for example, with FEA, we're very keen to get a lot more renewable energy sources. Inflation, again, we expect to stabilize to below 3% in the medium term. So, ladies and gentlemen, in a nutshell, that's the short presentation to give you a flavor, an idea of where we are, what are some of the areas that we need to think about. Of course, you can make your submissions, some submissions today. If you have written submissions, please feel free to give it to us. If you want to have some ideas after this, just email it to us. That's the email address. You want to post it to us. You want to visit Suva and drop it off, you can do that. That's the address. So let's open up the floor. There are some people who've been to some consultations where people have had some individual problems of theirs, personal problems. We've got staff there at the back. You can raise it with them and give them the documentation or any details that you want to. So let's open up the floor. Tell us what you people think of these things in Savusavu.